It is. It's spelled with a U, right? Morning? No, anyway. Dad jokes, Mourning. Anyway. I know. Like my daughter last week who was here, she says, he still tells the same dad jokes. Yeah, and every time they're funnier than the time he told them before. Every single time. That's one thing I did like about drivers training when I was teaching kids how to drive, because they've never heard those dad jokes, at least not from me. And if they didn't laugh, I'd threaten to fail them. That was funny, wasn't it? I'm making a big F on that. Oh, that was so funny. They start to laugh, Oh, I miss those days. Just that part of it, not the driving with them. So, all right, I'm rambling. Let's go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much. We get together. We get to take a look at your word and see what Daniel has to talk to us about today. Father, as we do, may your Holy Spirit open our eyes that we can see things that maybe we haven't seen before, or maybe it's just been a while. And I pray, Father, that you'd help us to find application to walk before you in a more worthy manner. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so last week we looked at Daniel chapter 10. We saw that Daniel had a very interesting vision, and after the vision he had an extraordinary visit from an angel. God sent the angel to give him just a bit more information. So Daniel did understand the vision, the scriptures say, but the angel is going to give him even more information than the vision. Thinking back to last Sunday, if you were here, if you were to use one word to describe that angel that appeared to Daniel, what one word might you use? Frightening, right? Good. Any others? Mighty. One that I use is the word I almost never use, which is the word awesome, which has got to be the most overused word in the English language. God is awesome. This coffee's awesome. Really? Kind of like they're on equal ground. So I almost never use the word awesome unless I'm talking about God. But this time I'll use that word. This angel was awesome. He was awe-inspiring. In fact, how did Daniel react when this angel appeared to him? He literally passed out. It says he fell into a deep sleep. Well, that's how they describe being passed out in the day. In fact, if you look closely, it looks like he face planted. Boom, Peggy. Stunned, yeah. Stun or stunning. Yeah, he face planted. It was so overwhelming to him. And also he had some men that were with him, and how did they react? Now they didn't see it, but how did they react to the presence of this being? They ran away and hid. Yay, way to support each other, guys, And there again, I use the word terror. They don't know what was going on, but they sensed in the atmosphere, there's something I don't want to be here for. And they took off, and they ran and hid. One of the eyebrow-raising things said by this angel that he had been held up for 3 weeks by the prince of Persia. Now, the prince of Persia we take to refer to as a demonic entity whose responsibility was the area of Persia. Now, this prince of Persia was at least as strong as this angel of God. And how do we know that he's at least as strong? He held him up for 3 weeks. So he had to be at least as strong, if not stronger, than God's angel here. And who helped break the stalemate? Michael, right, the archangel. As we studied last week, Michael may very well be the highest ranked angel of all. Among other things, his responsibility is the people of Israel, their protection and care. And also it appears that he is the general of the host of the armies of God, because in Revelation he's the one leading the angels against Satan. So Michael is a very powerful and influential angel. And he was the one that had to come and help this angel to break free. Remember, how old was Daniel at this time? He's in his 80s, 85, as Craig knows, probably approaching his prime. Another joke that never gets old, right? No, he's 85 at least years old, and now the angel starts to communicate with Daniel starting in chapter 11. So if you haven't done so, go ahead and turn to Daniel chapter 11. Daniel 10 was basically taken up with this angel and possibly a second angel trying to give Daniel strength. Daniel was overwhelmed. In fact, it took 3 times for the angel to finally, okay, now I can stand up and now I can talk. So this was very overwhelming for Daniel. And plus, we reflect on the fact this isn't his first rodeo. It's not his first angel. He's seen 4 others, or had 4 other experiences, I should say. This probably was the most awe-inspiring. But even so, he's overwhelmed. Now, let's talk about Daniel chapter 11 just for a second. There have been doubts about the authorship. Now, there's been doubts about the authorship of all of Daniel, because much of Daniel consists of what? Predictive prophecy, right. Much of Daniel consists of predictive prophecy. So anytime you have predictive prophecy, it's always doubted by skeptics and debated. However, Daniel chapter 11 is especially debated, and the reason why is because it is so exact. From verse 2 all the way to verse 35, we can find chapter and verse where historically this was fulfilled. We have names, we have dates, everything written in those verses was fulfilled historically. Now, because of that, you have doubts about the authorship. I mentioned in the early days, there was a philosopher from Tyre. Remember, Tyre is just north of Israel. Tyre, this philosopher named Porphyry from 300 AD, if you're writing this down, 300 AD, he said that so exact was this information, there's no way that this could be prophecy. It has to have been history written after the event. That was his conclusion when he reviewed it. Modern skepticism hasn't changed at all. They say the same thing. So exact is this prophecy, it has to have been written by an eyewitness or somebody after the fact. However, there have been a couple of things in recent history which has been brought forward that's caused a little consternation to the skeptics. One of them is, I believe it's 7 copies of Daniel found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, these copies date from anywhere from 200 BC all the way to 100 BC. So right in that time frame when some of this stuff's happening. So, the question that I ask is, was the ink still wet when they stuck it in the jar, right? I mean, really, it was happening when these things were written down. Now, I will say that this didn't silence all the critics, but it certainly toned them down a bit, right? Another example was Isaiah 53. For years, Isaiah 53 has to have been written by an eyewitness. It's too exact. Oh, there's Isaiah 53 in the Dead Sea Scrolls about 150 BC. So that's why you never hear about Isaiah 53 being, inaccurate or written after the fact now. Go ahead, Peggy. Right. Now, when you say that, if you tell your Jewish brother, your Jewish friend, that that's a forbidden book, they say, no, there's no forbidden book. However, they have writings throughout the year they read, and that's omitted. They don't read Isaiah 53 during their prescribed writing. So in a sense, it's not forbidden, but they don't go out of their way to look at it. So, but yeah, thank you. However, what's the real problem? What's the problem with Porphyry? What's the problem with modern skeptics? The problem, what is their real issue? Right. And there's a God. There is a real God who has the ability to predict the future. He sees it right in front of him. It's over my head, but God sees the present, the future, and the past as if it's one thing. And so for him to look at the future and write it down in the present, that's nothing for God. So if you have a small view of God or don't have a view of God at all, that's ridiculous. Of course it can't be true. However, how big is your God? My God made the entire universe with a word from beginning to end, much less all the other stuff. He'll have no trouble telling me what's going to happen a few hundred years down the road. They have a faith problem, not an information problem. All right, so the source of this information. Where does the source of chapter 11 come from? Look in chapter 10, verse 21. And this is the angel talking to Daniel. However, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth. Now, the writing of truth, we talked about that at the end of our class last week. So for us, what's our writing of truth? The Bible. Exactly right. Now, apparently, there is a writing of truth that is of heavenly origin, that maybe the angels have access to it. I mean, this is pure speculation. But maybe that's where this angel got the information. He took that writing of truth in heaven, read it, and he's transcribing it now to Daniel. That's very likely the case. There again, no trouble with that. God can write down every detail about the future that he wants in this book. This seems to be where this information is coming from. So, what we're going to do, we're not going to read through all of chapter 11 because, frankly, there's about 3 or 4 of us in here that would like it because we're history geeks, and the rest of you would fall asleep. So I don't want to put you through that. So we're going to read sections, and we'll talk about it, and we'll kind of synopsize some of it, okay? But let's read verses 1 through 4. We're going to start back there with Sam. We'll go across there. And Bill, verse 2, if you got it there. Chapter 11, verse 2, yeah. And how about if we go to Sharon back there? Thank you. So again, in verse 1, which we talked about last week, the angel gives Daniel kind of he explains to him what his previous assignment was. His previous assignment was to stand for Darius, Darius, and give him encouragement, to protect him and encourage him. So he gives him that information. And by the way, that's why I think this angel is God's prince of Persia. I think he is God's representative to care for Persia. But that's my speculation, just based upon what his assignment was. So he turns from this assignment to verse 2, and he mentions the next 3 kings in passing. Now, I could tell you the 3 kings. They're words that you won't remember. I don't remember either, right? But they were just nondescript kings of Persia. The 4th king that's mentioned is Darius the First. Darius the First turned out to be quite a successful king. He accumulated a great amount of material wealth. After him, there was a king named Xerxes. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Where did you hear the name Xerxes before? Exactly right, Esther. You may have heard the name Ahasuerus, which the names are interchangeable, Xerxes and Ahasuerus. Okay, so after Darius the First, Xerxes became king, and he reigned from 486 to 464 BC. During this time period, Xerxes decided that it would be a good idea to attack Greece. So he spent 4 years accumulating material, people, etc. He could do this with his great wealth, and he came up with a plan to attack Greece. However, it didn't end well for him. It turned out that Greece really gave him a licking, and Xerxes went back to his country to kind of lick his wounds. And a lot of scholars think that the whole reason these feasts occurred in the book of Esther was Xerxes' attempt to kind of like, build the people back up, prove their power. They are powerful, they are wealthy. And so these feasts were to show that to the people, to give them confidence. And we know that the rest of Esther occurred during that time period as well. In verse 3, it talks about Alexander's conquests and death. So verse 3, a mighty king will arise, and he will do as he's pleased. Alexander did everything he wanted to do. I think he traveled, 11,000 miles. And every battle he took part in, if I remember right, he won. Every single one. And the only reason that they stopped conquering, because the men all got together and said, you know, we've been away from home for a long time, and we want to go back. And so Alexander says, okay, we'll go back. However, he didn't last long. And at the age of 32 years old, Alexander died from a suspected case of malaria and alcoholism. 32 years old, truly at his prime, you know, especially as a man, but also as a military leader. He was on top of his game. He goes to sleep one night, he doesn't wake up. So that's the situation. Well, I was going to mention too, Alexander used Xerxes' attack as a reason to get even with Persia, which happened 146 years before. Now that's a grudge, right? You're holding a grudge. So anyway, he used that as an excuse. And then it says also in verse 4 that the kingdom is divided to the points of the compass, and that's exactly right. You had the four top generals of Alexander who got together, and they divided up his kingdom into four different segments based upon north, south, east, and west. Now, the only two that we're interested in, because it affects Israel, is the north, which was called Syria, and it was ruled by the Seleucids, and the south, which was called Egypt, and which was ruled by the Ptolemies. It's spelled with a P. The P is silent. I don't know why you use it then, but hey, English is weird too, right? You know, GP. Anyway, I'm going to that. So we're going to synopsize the next set of verses. You notice verse 5 to verse 20. What you have there is you have a series of ongoing wars between Egypt and Syria. It's cycled for 140 years. For the next 140 years, there was war between north and south. You've heard of the 100 Years' War in Europe? Well, this kind of beats them. How it wasn't constant warfare. It was going back and forth, hence my use of the word cycle. So 3 times the south attacked the north. 3 times the north attacked the south. And they went back and forth during this 140-year period. And each time, Israel was the pathway. So you've got Syria to the north, you have Egypt to the south, and you have Israel, which is the pathway. Now, as the pathway, how would Israel be affected by these conflicts? Or would they? Armies back and forth, right. The armies are coming back and forth, and they're going through your land. Peggy. Exactly. You know, in modern times, especially our army, they take all their food with them, right? Logistically. Back in the day, it's like, you're going to live off the land. In other words, you get whatever you can. And they did a good job of it, you know. And so what would happen is the army comes through, and if you didn't have your food hidden, harvested, or whatever, it's going to be a pretty lean year for you the next year, okay? Also, what other impact might this have that the armies are going back and forth? How else would it influence them? Eric? You get house guests. I didn't think about that, but you're right. Oh, look, our cousin from Egypt's back. Yay, and all his friends. How else? How would the government of Israel be affected by these people going back and forth? What would be expected of them? Not only to take care of the people, which we've mentioned. We expect you to be our ally, right? We're going through the fight, in this case, the bad northerners. We expect you to be our ally. And if you're not our ally, we're going to kill you. Now, that's a problem. Because next year, the South is in control. Didn't you support the North? Oh, no, we were guerrillas. We were fighting against the North. We're for you. Back and forth, back and forth. In fact, if you look in verse 14, it says, now in those times many will arise up against the king of the south, Egypt. The violent ones among your people will also lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they will fall down. So in other words, there's going to be at least one time where people of Israel get together and say, we're on your side, and they commit troops. It doesn't work well. And of course, when that happens, the other group comes back and says, hey, You killed my cousin. And you can imagine. So for Israel, Israel couldn't maintain neutrality. Every time this happened, it would be devastating to the people of Israel. I don't think it was by intent to harm Israel, not always, but that's what would happen because of what would be going on. All right, so that's how verses 5 to 20 basically go back and forth. Let's go from there to verse 21, which is where Antiochus enters history. Now, I'm not mentioning this. More is written about Antiochus in this section than all the other kings combined. So Antiochus gets some real, I guess you'd call it street cred. So let's read verses 21 to 28, and I think we're back with Joe. And Linda. And then Cheryl, you got the next one there? All right, and Tim, verse 24, if you got it? Verse 28, Robert, if you got it. All right, thanks everybody. So verse 21, if you look at, it says, in his place, referring to the previous king. The previous king, his name was Seleucus IV. He died. In verse 21, in his place a despicable person will arise on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred, but he will come in a time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue. So he shrewdly seizes power. So Seleucus died mysteriously. A lot of them think it was by poisoning because that's how you got rid of your adversaries back in the day, as you would poison them. And so now Seleucus had an heir. He had a son who could take power. However, this son was in Rome. What would happen in the day is when Rome would come in and either take a country or get the country to agree to serve them, they would take typically some people from usually the kingship or whomever or higher-ups as hostages to Rome. And why they would do that? Now, if your people here misbehave and rebel against us, these hostages, they're all dead. So they would hold them there as hostages in case you decided to do something really bad. So that's where his son was. In the meantime, while he was there, we see that Antiochus stepped in and somehow talked his way into power. And once he achieved this power, no one removed him. Rome didn't come in and remove him. I mean, we know it's because it's God's will, but humanly speaking, I don't know why. I mean, he shouldn't have been king, but yet there he is. He does indeed become king. Hold your place there and flip over a couple pages to Daniel chapter 8. Now, if you remember, Daniel chapter 8 deals specifically with Antiochus. In Daniel chapter 8, verse 23, it says, talking about, if you look back in 21 and 22, it's talking about the kingdoms that come from from Alexander. In the latter period of their rule, when the transgressors have run their course, a king will arise, insolent and skilled in intrigue. Okay, so there it is. So you have Antiochus has said he's going to come in, and he talks his way into power. And by so doing, he gains power and great wealth. Also notice in verse 24, back to chapter 11, it says, he will distribute plunder, booty, and possessions among them. Now it's interesting, quite often when a person would take power, they would accumulate most of the possessions for themselves. However, he's practicing what we like to call today redistribution of wealth. We think it's a 21st century thing, right? No, it's been around for a long time. So basically he comes in, he takes over, and he takes some of the riches from the government, he takes riches from the rich people, and he distributes them to his followers, because now you've got more loyal followers. You know, these are people that you have helped to buy. Again, going back to chapter 8 and verse 24, talking about Antiochus again, his power will be mighty, but not by his own power, and he will destroy to the extraordinary degree and prosper and perform his will. So the stuff that he does at first, it works very well. I get kind of amused by verse 27, which talks about Antiochus and the king of Egypt. As for both kings, now tell me if this doesn't sound like modern politics. As for both kings, their hearts will be intent on evil, and they will speak lies to each other at the same table, but it will not succeed. They both know they're speaking lies to each other, and yet they still say it. It's just, that sounds so modern to me. We see it all the time, don't we? All right, let's read verses 29 to 35. I believe we're with Scott. And Steve, we're with you at 34. All right, let's stop right there. Thank you. So we have Antiochus. Antiochus is now going to build a name for himself. He is going to go and he's going to attack Egypt. Egypt has always been extremely wealthy. They have the Nile River. They have abundant wheat. Even through the Roman times, Egypt was the breadbasket of Rome. They had so much wheat that whoever controlled Egypt, you had no problem with food. So Antiochus is going to go ahead and attack Egypt. However, he finds there is an issue. In verse 30, it talks about ships of Kittim coming. Now, this is opposition by Rome. These ships that arrived were full of Roman troops, and they were there specifically to prevent Antiochus from attacking Egypt. Word got out, and they were going to oppose him. In fact, the Roman emissary, his name was Popilius Lanus, sorry for those of you that took Latin, brought a letter to Antiochus from the Roman Senate forbidding Antiochus from attacking Egypt. So the Roman Senate was involved and said, "Thou shalt not attack Egypt." Now this is a big deal. Rome is becoming the premier power. Antiochus is powerful, but he truly doesn't have that much in the way of troops, so he has a decision to make. You will not do this. And so he says, well, can you please give me time to think about that? And so Pompilius said, well, sure. So he took either his sword or a staff, and like this is him, and he walked around him. He's standing in the sand. And they said, by the time you leave this circle, you'll make your decision. Is that shrewd and clever or what? I love that. So obviously he decided, yeah, well, I'll go back. And he went back in great humiliation, much to the detriment of the Israelites. In verse 30, looking at that again, he will become enraged at the Holy Covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. We've talked before from chapter 8 about how Antiochus hates the Jews and how he persecutes them. At this time, the Jews were starting to rebel against him, and he heard word as he's returning. He's been humiliated by Rome. He's not going to be humiliated by these Jews. And so he attacks, and if I remember right, I wrote it down, 80,000 people were killed by Antiochus. 40,000 were sold into slavery, and 40 more thousand were taken as captives. So devastating effects to the nation of Israel. He didn't need an excuse, but he used this rebellion as an excuse. And we talked before, chapter 8, about Antiochus' rebellion, how he went to the temple, said you can no longer worship according to the covenant. You can no longer have a copy of the law. If we have a copy of the law, our Bible, you'll be put to death. If you circumcise your sons, I'll hang your sons from a tree. It's terrible persecution. They went to the temple. They sacrificed a huge sow on the temple and said, this is now dedicated to Zeus, which was the Greek high god, as it were. And once a month, he required the high priest to sacrifice a pig on the altar in memorial of him. Now, needless to say, this didn't go over real well with those that were still alive. Matthias was the high priest. He actually murdered one of Antiochus' officials who ordered him to do that. Of course, they then fled, and there was great persecution, great war. So it talks about in here about Antiochus is doing two things. He's trying to get people to forsake it, but then he's taking action against those who don't. And it talks about verse 33, people falling by the sword, captivity, and plunder. They really suffered. They suffered greatly. As it turns out, they were finally successful in overcoming Antiochus, but it took over 6 years. So you can imagine the devastation during that time. And then, do you remember who is considered the hero of that? It's written in the Apocrypha. Come on, Ann. Go. Oh, fine. Just teasing. Judas Maccabees. The book of Maccabees there's 2 books in the Apocrypha which talk about, this thing that went on. Now, again, it's not scripture. However, historically, it's very accurate, those 2 books. So it talks about this. And from this period, we see the origin of Hanukkah, because Hanukkah began because they said that there was enough oil for the lamp for one day, and it lasted 14 days, miraculously. We also see the origin of the Pharisees, boo, hiss, right? Which started off good, because they were the ones who opposed. And then the Sadducees, which didn't have quite the same beginning, because they were the ones who compromised with the Greeks more so. So this is where these people, their origin, that we see that Jesus is dealing with in the New Testament. Okay, so let's take a look at Antiochus' progeny. So we'll be looking at verses 36 to 39, and where did I leave off? Okay, so Sarah, if you got 36, if you wouldn't mind. And 39, if you got it there. Okay, so now there's a change that occurs here with verse 36. From verse 2 to verse 35, there is historic documentation of all these things happening. Now again, think about how phenomenal that is. This was written in 536 BC. These events started happening in 305 BC. So you're talking about 200 and some years down the road. So when I read this stuff, I read it like I'm reading history because I know what happened, but it's not history. It's stuff that hasn't happened, and it's so accurate it came true. However, at verse 35, there is a change, because after 35, we don't have documentation as accurate as we do for the first verses. So what's the change? And I think the change is, for your notes, a switch from near to far prophecy. So the first part dealing with Antiochus is near. It's within a couple, 300 years. Well, more than that, but you know what I mean, relatively near. Now we're switching to, in this case, 2,500, 2,600 years down the road, where we are, because this hasn't happened yet. This is who? Whom? It's the Antichrist. Right, so we jump from Antiochus to the Antichrist. Now, people talk about this. Prophecy is just flat weird sometimes, you know. I mean, God wrote it, so it makes sense, and it can make sense when you delve into it, but sometimes it's strange. And this is a situation where we go from Antiochus all the way to Antichrist. Part of the reason they can do that is because Antiochus is so much like the Antichrist will be, that's why we can make that transition. So it's like you're saying, now picture Antiochus only in 2,500 years. And that's kind of almost what you'll be looking at, essentially. So, a switch from far to near. And again, it's all prophecy. The first part dealt with 400 years down the road. Now this deals with 2,500 years down the road. All right, so it's still future. So the Antichrist character, in verse 36, it says he speaks against God. And if you hold your place there and flip over to Daniel chapter 7. So Daniel chapter 8 deals with Antiochus. Daniel chapter 7 deals with the Antichrist. They're from different origins. So in chapter 7, verse 11, then I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and his body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. And in Revelation 13, we won't look at that, but it says the same thing. So this Antichrist, he is known for being a talker. He's a big talker. He boasts. He carries on. He makes great claims. So he's known for the things that he says. It says in verse 37, that he rejects traditional gods. Now here's a thought. What would we consider the traditional gods of today? If we were to make this statement about gods of today, what would be the traditional gods? Well, I wasn't thinking about that, but it can be. I'm thinking about real gods that people worship, per se. Buddha? What's that? Allah, yeah. Muhammad, well, Muhammad was a prophet of Allah. I mean, but Hindu gods, of which there are thousands. The real God, the God of the Bible, Jesus, etc. So, and there are more. There's all sorts of different religions, but these would be the traditional gods. So, Antichrist will reject them all. Antichrist won't be serving any of them as God. Antichrist will be, I'll kind of hint, it's kind of what Linda was talking about. Antichrist will serve a God, but it won't be the traditional gods that we think about today. So, a difference between Antichrist and Antiochus is that Antiochus revered historical gods. That's a big difference. Remember, Antiochus said that you have to worship Zeus. Now, Zeus was the Greek primary god. So he didn't reject historical gods, but the Antichrist will. He will not be about worshiping the traditional gods. We also saw in verse 36, his days are numbered. He will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. So his days are truly numbered. And if we go back to Daniel chapter 7 again, we see the same thing. In verse 25, He's talking again. He will speak out against the Most High. It's interesting, he rejects God, but yet he speaks out against God. Isn't that funny? It'd be like me speaking out against leprechauns. I hate leprechauns. Leprechauns are bad. You're all going, leprechauns? I mean, no one believes in leprechauns. Peggy. And that was my next point. You're tracking with me beautifully. Great introduction. No, exactly. The quote-unquote new atheist. Yeah. I mean, why are they so offended if I believe in God? I love leprechauns. What's wrong with leprechauns, right? I mean, I don't, but you get the point. You might think I'm a little wacky, but I mean, you're not going to talk about stoning me to death because I like leprechauns. But yet they, the new atheists, they hate God. You know, how did I put it before? There's no such thing as God, and I hate him. That's pretty much how it goes with them. I'm not being facetious. That really is. And it's like Richard Dawkins writes book after book about how there's no God and how much he hates him. And you know, he goes so far as to say, if you come across somebody who believes in God, get in their face and make them uncomfortable. Wow, really? Why does it offend you so much? I don't care if you don't believe in God. I mean, whatever. Anyway, you get the point. His days are numbered, the Antichrist. So in 7:25 it says, speaking about the Antichrist, he will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. So this refers to the second half of the tribulation period, which is 3.5 years long. Time, times, 1, 3.5. So this refers to the fact that Antichrist's days are numbered. He only has so much time. In verse 38 of chapter 11, it says he honors a god of war. That's interesting. Who was the Roman god of war? Exactly right. Mars was the Roman god of war. I don't think this is referring to this. I personally think that this is like a concept. I think his god is war. Kind of like what Linda mentioned, you know, what we can be considered to be an idol. You know, money, pleasure, power. These can be my idol. I mean, I don't actually say this is my God, but practically speaking, that's who I worship and serve. I think it could be for this person. I don't know that he will proclaim a God of war, but that's who he's serving. He is serving war. He wants to see war go on. And there's an interesting phrase in verse 37. It says, no regard for the desire of women. Now, that's been given a whole bunch of possible interpretations. Has anyone heard any of the interpretations of that phrase, what it might be? One interpretation of that phrase in modern times is he's going to be a homosexual. You know, I don't personally think that. I mean, it wouldn't be wrong for the interpretation, but I don't think that that's the case. What I think it is, if you were a Jewish girl, what would be your number one desire? Well, true. To bear the Messiah is what I'm thinking about. The Jewish women always wanted to be the one who would bear the Messiah. And so I think that's what it's referring to. He has no regard for Jesus whatsoever. The Messiah, no regard. He is for this God of war. And also in verse 39, we see that, like other dictators, he employs the carrot and the stick. If you do what I tell you to do, good things will happen to you. In verse 39, it talks about him giving rulership to people who work with him, giving out the land for cheap price. So you have the carrot and the stick. That's the carrot. And the stick, of course, is he'll put you to death. Any comments or what on that so far before we do the last part? Okay, Jen. Oh, yeah. Some of the confused. Right. what Jen is saying is, you look at all the confusion going on, gender confusion and stuff like that. It could somehow play into this. And there again, it doesn't make sense, which means it's demonic, Yeah, so. And that's why it says, Paul says, there have been many antichrists. There are many people who oppose God and this. Plus, he always has to have one in their wings, right? I mean, Satan isn't like God in that he knows what's going to happen. He always has to have an antichrist in the wings somewhere, ready to bring him in when the time is right. And so throughout history, there's always been an antichrist because Satan doesn't know when the end occurs. Anyway, a little speculation on my part. I know you share my speculation so well, or tolerate it so well. Let's see. So let's read verses 40 to 45. And Tony, we're back there with you. And Carolyn, would you get verse 45 for us? Thank you. Okay, so verses 40 to 45, and some of this is a little speculation on my part, so if you don't completely agree, I fully understand. Just don't say anything. No, just kidding. Don't disagree with me. No. It seems that war brings the Antichrist into Israel. Now, remember, the Antichrist will make a covenant, an agreement to protect Israel, supposedly for 7 years. They're going to be Israel's protection. It appears from Daniel that they don't want it. We talked about a few weeks ago that they're forced to do it, or at least that's what seems. In the middle of this 7-year period, the covenant is broken. So you ask yourself, well, what initiates this? Why does he come into the land of Israel? I think it's because of this reason. It seems that wars bring him into Israel. Okay, so it talks about he is attacked from the north and from the south. It talks about in verse 40. And hold your place in Daniel, if you would, and turn to Revelation chapter 16 just for a second. It's always interesting how Revelation and Daniel and Matthew 24 integrate so well together. And this may be out of place chronologically, but I can still make the point. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean demons like frogs. For they are the spirits of demons, performing signs which go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them together for the war of the great day of God Almighty. So in this case, I think it's the final battle, but my point is that you have spiritual forces that are working. And it looks like it causes those of the north and those of the south to assault the Antichrist's kingdom, probably about midway, and he defeats them. He'll be victorious over them. But then there's more. It talks about in verse 44, rumors from the east and the north. So you have another army that's threatening him from the east and from the north. Pure speculation is that from the north, from Ezekiel 38. Ezekiel 38 talks about an incredible battle whereby Russian troops and all sorts of allies march on Israel and are destroyed. Is this that battle? I don't know. If you look in Revelation chapter 9 again, it talks about the army from the east. In Revelation chapter 9, then the 6th angel sounded, and I heard from the 4 horns of the golden altar, which is before God, one saying to the 6th angel who had the trumpet, release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels who had been prepared for the hour and day and month and year were released, so that they would kill a third of mankind. The number of the armies of the horsemen were 200 million. I heard the number of them. 200 million. I mean, and the armies of the east. I saw a Time magazine, was it Time? No, Life magazine article from 1964, and the headline talked about how China was boasting they had 200 million soldiers. It was in print. I was like, wow. And that was a long time ago. They got more now. And they're chomping at the bit for war, aren't they? It seems. It seems like they want it. It's weird. But anyway, we have this army of the east who is opposing the Antichrist. And did you catch it? The war that ensues kills a third of mankind. At that time, it'll be 2 billion with a B people. It's unimaginable. A war of that intensity obviously involves nuclear weapons, it involves biological, etc. It involves everything that you can imagine. Just there again, people that say, well, I'll get saved when the tribulation starts. Good luck with that. Yeah, you can be saved, and by all means, yeah, but it's going to be very terrible because the wrath of God is being poured out. In verse 45 it says, talking about the Antichrist, he will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful mountain, and yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. So Antichrist will put his command post in Jerusalem. That's where he's going to be in charge, and that's where he's going to do all the other junk that we're going to look at in Daniel chapter 12 next time. But in a nutshell, he is going to set himself up as God. He is going to make an image, which this image will be able to talk and demand worship. He will also demand sacrifice to himself. So see, these are the things this Antichrist is going to do. But the point is, he's here now, probably because of these wars and oppositions which occurred. Israel is considered the navel of the world because it joins 3 continents together. And throughout history, soldiers have traveled back and forth, not just during the biblical times, but even beyond. So that's why Israel has been so tromped on, as it were. Final thoughts, takeaways. Anything occur to you? Pretty much me neither. No. Come on, Daniel. Yes, Satan is definitely working with him, and God allows him to. Yep, Satan is his propulsion, his source of power, etc. Yeah, exactly. Yes, my dear. And Antiochus? You know what? I did know, but I don't remember now. I'll tell you when I get home. Any other things? Any other questions I can't answer? There's always a few, right? All right. One thing I have down is, what kind of God writes the future like history? What kind of God does that? You know, and to where you can't change it. Peggy. Yep. God who lives in all times. He does. He looks at time like a spectator, in essence. Exactly right. Yes, Sue. Yes. Yes, at the appointed time. Exactly right. Steve. Yeah. Oh yeah, a God is not created by men. Right. Yeah, we wouldn't hardly imagine that. And one point I was going to make too, remember when Jesus was talking to Peter and he says, oh Peter, Satan has requested to sift you like wheat, you know. And also he says, you're going to deny me 3 times, which is the sifting. My response would have been, you said no, didn't you? But my point is, he tells Peter, before the rooster crows in the morning, 3 times, there's no stinking way. I mean, I wouldn't do it anyway, but now I'm forewarned. I will make sure that can't happen. No. God's in control of that. Even if you're forewarned, it will still happen. Satan knows the Bible, I think, better than we do. He's read Revelation. He's read Daniel. There ain't no way that's going to happen. Oh, yeah, just like it's written. Because God's God, we're not, and He's not. He's in charge. Can we trust Him? And the answer is yes. Difficult times, we can trust a God that writes the future like it's history. Heavenly Father, thank you for our time. Thank you for your word. Lord, your word, among other things, is a great encouragement and a source of blessing. And we look at the world, and as Pastor Jason has mentioned a number of times, it is challenging. It's scary. Some of the stuff, things that we wouldn't have imagined 5 years ago. And you go, where is this from? But Lord, please remind us again and again, you are in charge. You're in control. And we may not like it at the moment, but you are in charge. And all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose, whom He has set up to honor you. Lord, I'm paraphrasing, but Lord, you've set us up to honor you, and I pray that we would. Be with us in the next service. Father, be with Pastor Jason. May he preach your word with power, zeal, and passion. May you be with the worship team, and may you help us to open hearts to hear your word and serve you. In Jesus' name, amen.